North to Alaska. These are 20 hidden facts about the 1960 film that show how chaos, tragedy, and pure improvisation somehow created one of John Wayne's biggest moneymakers. The October 1960 comedy western pulled in $10 million despite filming without a finished script, losing its director before cameras rolled, watching its studio head die mid-production, and opening just days after the man who sang its theme song died in a highway crash. For anyone who saw this rollicking adventure in theaters or fell in love with it over the decades, what happened behind the cameras turned out wilder than anything that made it to the screen. Fact number 1. John Wayne made this film to save himself from financial ruin. Most fans assume John Wayne signed on for North to Alaska from a position of strength, but the truth cuts the other way. The Duke was broke and desperate, having poured millions of his own money into the Alamo, the passion project that opened just 2 weeks earlier on October 24, 1960. That epic carried a $12 million budget and brought in around $20 million at the box office, which sounds good until you realize it counted as a financial disappointment against those massive costs. Wayne's business manager had also been stealing from him for years, leaving the biggest star in Hollywood scrambling for cash. Production records show Wayne committed without reading a single page of script because he needed the paycheck that badly. The irony writes itself when you step back and look at what happened next. The Alamo represented Wayne's carefully planned artistic statement about American heroism and sacrifice, while North to Alaska got thrown together as pure commerce with no higher ambitions whatsoever. The comedy western cost somewhere between $3.5 and $3.8 million to make and earned $10 million worldwide, making it far more profitable per dollar than the Alamo epic ever managed to be. Sometimes the projects you create for art leave you bankrupt, and the ones you do strictly for money end up saving your career. Fact number 2. The entire film was shot without a completed script. Principal photography kicked off on May 9, 1960, and director Henry Hathaway spent the next several months inching the production forward on an improvised day-by-day basis because nobody had actually finished writing the screenplay. Picture a major studio film starring John Wayne with cinemascope cameras and millions of dollars on the line, and the cast showing up each morning with no idea what scenes they'd be shooting the following week. Wayne himself went to the New York Times during production and didn't hold back, saying he'd gone to see Buddy Adler and Spyro Skouras to complain they didn't even have a finished script after supposedly preparing for a year. Henry was a fine director, Wayne said, but he shouldn't have to be making up scenes as he went along, and if Wayne tried running an independent production this way, he'd go broke in a heartbeat. The screenplay credits list John Lee Maheen, Martin Racken, and Claude Binion, with uncredited help from legendary Oscar-winning screenwriter Ben Hecht, plus Wendell Mays. A writer's strike had stalled the script throughout 1959, then the original writers Racken and Maheen left to work in NBC television instead. Hathaway and his actors were essentially winging it day after day, which makes the fact that the finished film holds together and actually entertains people nothing short of miraculous. Fact number 3. The studio head died while they were making the film. Shooting without a finished script created enough chaos on its own, but then Buddy Adler, the head of 20th Century Fox and producer of Oscar-winning From Here to Eternity, died while cameras were still rolling. The production lost its primary champion at the studio, right when it needed support the most, creating a power vacuum that nobody knew how to fill. Adler had pushed for the project from the beginning, and his death left the film essentially orphaned mid-production. Fox president Spyro Skouras responded by demanding budget cuts, forcing Hathaway to slash planned location shots just to keep the whole thing from collapsing. The fact that they kept filming and actually finished the picture speaks to Hathaway's toughness and Wayne's professionalism, but plenty of people expected the studio to shut it down and write off the loss. Fact number 4. Not one frame was filmed in Alaska. A film called North to Alaska ought to have at least some footage shot in Alaska, but that's not what happened here. Every single scene came from California locations chosen for convenience and cost rather than accuracy. The main Nome waterfront and town exteriors got built at Point Mugu, a U.S. naval missile base in Ventura County, California, while the wilderness cabin scenes with that steaming creek were filmed at Hot Creek in Inyo National Forest near Mammoth Mountain. Additional location work happened at Big Bear Lake in San Bernardino National Forest, and at Lone Pine in the Alabama hills, with Mount Morrison visible in the background of many shots. The real Nome sits on flat treeless tundra right on the Bering Sea coast, and looks absolutely nothing like the mountainous forested California landscapes filling the screen. Critics caught on immediately, noting that the sets looked like they'd been lifted straight from traditional westerns, which in a sense they had been. Audiences in 1960 didn't care one bit, because Alaska had just become the 49th state on January 3, 1959, and the whole country was gripped by Alaska fever. People wanted Alaska stories even if the Alaska looked suspiciously like the Sierra Nevada, and that's exactly what they got. Fact number 5. Capucine only got the role because she was dating the power broker. Capucine, the French model turned actress, landed the role of Michelle Angel Bonnet through the oldest form of Hollywood networking there is. She happened to be romantically involved with super agent Charles K. Feldman, who controlled nearly every key player attached to the production. Feldman represented Buddy Adler, the studio head who greenlit the project. He represented John Wayne, the star who could make or break it. He represented writers Rakin and Maheen, the men shaping the story. When you're dating the man who controls the entire production from top to bottom, the role essentially comes gift-wrapped. Richard Fleischer, the original director, reportedly used Capucine's casting as his ticket out, claiming he refused to work with her. She'd already bombed an audition for the role of Feathers in Rio Bravo the year before, and Fleischer apparently saw no reason to give her another chance. Despite all the backdoor dealing and the director quitting over her involvement, Capucine turned out wonderful in the part. The film magazine Film Inc. later called her perfectly cast, elegant and beautiful, noting she delivered one of the film's best performances. Nepotism doesn't always produce disasters, and this time the girlfriend of the power broker actually had the goods. Fact number 6. Gary Crosby quit and a teen idol took his place. Gary Crosby, Bing Crosby's son, had been cast as Billy Pratt, the younger brother character, but he quit abruptly in January 1960, with the excuse that the 17-year-old character felt too young for him to play. Fox needed a quick replacement and grabbed teen pop singer Fabian, continuing a deliberate strategy Wayne and the studio had been running to pull younger audiences into theaters. Ricky Nelson had appeared in Rio Bravo in 1959. Frankie Avalon showed up in the Alamo that same year, and now Fabian got his turn in the rotation. The Harvard Lampoon handed Fabian their Uncrossed Heart Award for Least Promising Actor of 1960, but Wayne couldn't have cared less about critical acclaim for these teen idols. Box office mattered, and putting popular young singers into his westerns brought teenage girls to films they otherwise would have skipped entirely. Smart business trumped artistic purity, even when it meant sharing screen time with actors 3 decades younger than himself. Fact number 7. Stuart Granger was desperate for work and terrified of the director. Stuart Granger, the distinguished British actor playing George Pratt, wrote in his memoirs that he remained always grateful to John Wayne for getting him cast because work had completely dried up. Granger had just left MGM, offers had stopped coming in, and his career sat in what people politely called a transitional stage. North to Alaska became his final Hollywood film before he relocated to Europe for spaghetti westerns, and he took it because he desperately needed the paycheck. Hathaway terrified him from day one, and Granger didn't hide that fact in his autobiography. He described the director as a cigar-chewing, bullying type who transformed into a monster the moment he walked onto a set, and Granger admitted he spent the entire shoot genuinely frightened of the man. Turner Classic Movies later suggested this fear explains why Granger's attempts to sound American collapse periodically throughout the film, because maintaining an accent becomes nearly impossible when you're terrified your director might scream at you between every take. Hathaway never apologized for his methods or his reputation, once stating flat out that to be a good director you had to be a bastard, and he knew exactly what he was. Despite the terror and the accent problems, Granger and Wayne developed genuine chemistry on screen, and their bickering partnership became one of the film's highlights. And if those behind-the-scenes facts surprised you, make sure to subscribe to this channel because we dig up the stories that even classic film fans don't know, bringing you the real Hollywood history behind the movies you love. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Fact number 8. Hathaway hated the title and wanted to call it something else. Henry Hathaway considered North to Alaska a terrible choice and fought the studio over it, arguing the title sounded slightly misleading because it suggested a serious adventure tale when the film actually played as broad comedy. His preferred alternative was The Blonde Rush, which would have signaled the comedic tone immediately while playing on the Gold Rush setting in a way that made people smile before they even bought tickets. Fox refused to budge because they'd already arranged for Johnny Horton to record a theme song called North to Alaska, and once that song entered production the title was locked regardless of what the director wanted. Looking back now, Fox made the right call despite Hathaway's objections. North to Alaska sticks in your memory and ties directly to the Alaska statehood excitement that swept the country in 1959 and 1960. The Blonde Rush signals comedy well enough, sure, but it also sounds cheaper and more disposable, like something you'd catch on the bottom half of a double bill and forget by morning. Sometimes studio executives actually know better than the director, even when that director happens to be Henry Hathaway. Fact number 9. Johnny Horton recorded the theme song just 3 months before he died. Mike Phillips and Tillman Franks wrote North to Alaska specifically for the film, with Franks serving double duty as Horton's manager and bassist. Horton recorded the track on August 9, 1960, at Bradley Film and Recording Studios in Nashville, with Don Law producing for Columbia Records. The single hit stores just 2 weeks later on August 22, moving from recording session to retail faster than most songs managed in that era. Charts tell the story of what happened next. The song peaked at number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100 and stayed on the charts for 23 weeks straight. Country radio sent it to number 1, where it sat for 5 solid weeks from January through February 1961. Canada took it to number 1 as well. Australia sent it to number 2, and it charted in Norway, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom. The recording became one of Johnny Horton's signature songs and appeared after his death on Johnny Horton's Greatest Hits in January 1961, which turned into one of the best-selling country albums of its time. Horton brought a personal connection to the material that most singers couldn't match. He'd actually lived and worked in Alaska as a fisherman back in the late 1940s, which earned him the stage name The Singing Fisherman that followed him throughout his career. His earlier track, When It's Springtime in Alaska It's 40 Below, had already topped the country charts in 1959, riding that same Alaska statehood wave. North to Alaska represented the peak of his saga song style, those narrative folk country ballads that made him famous in the first place. Fact number 10. Johnny Horton died just days before the film opened. November 4, 1960, Johnny Horton performed at the Skyline Club in Austin, Texas, then climbed into his Cadillac with passengers Tillman Franks and Tommy Tomlinson for the drive toward Shreveport. Around 1:30 in the morning on November 5, while driving on Highway 79 near Milano, Texas, a Ford Ranchero crossed the center line and slammed into them head-on. The driver was James Evan Davis, a 19-year-old Texas A&M student who was drunk. St. Francis Hospital in Cameron, Texas pronounced Johnny Horton dead at 1:45 in the morning. 35 years old and gone just like that. Tillman Franks survived with severe head injuries that took months to heal, while Tommy Tomlinson eventually had his left leg amputated. James Evan Davis, the drunk driver who killed a country music legend, received a 2-year suspended sentence for murder without malice and never spent a single day in prison. North to Alaska opened in U.S. theaters somewhere between November 7th and November 10th depending on the market, which means Johnny Horton died anywhere from 2 to 5 days before his theme song played in movie houses across America. His funeral happened November 8th in Shreveport, and Johnny Cash showed up to read chapter 20 from the Gospel of John before later admitting he locked himself in one of the hotel bar rooms and cried. The tragedy almost certainly pushed the song higher on the charts through that winter, as people bought the record to remember Johnny Horton and heard that cheerful North to Alaska chorus while knowing its singer had just died on a dark Texas highway. Fact number 11. Horton's death echoed Hank Williams in an eerie way. Johnny Horton was married to Billie Jean Jones, who'd already buried one country music legend as the widow of Hank Williams. Both Williams and Horton made their final public performances at the exact same venue, Austin's Skyline Club. Williams played there before dying on January 1, 1953, then 7 years later, Horton performed there on November 4, 1960, just hours before the crash that killed him. Same club, same fate, 2 of country music's greatest voices silenced in their 30s. Billie Jean endured burying 2 legendary husbands, both lost far too young to accidents nobody saw coming. One more detail makes the whole thing even stranger. Multiple sources from that era mention Johnny Horton having premonitions about dying at the hands of a drunk driver, though whether that's truth or posthumous mythology remains unclear. People who knew him talked about his unease around car travel and his specific fear of drunk drivers. If those premonitions were real and not just stories that grew after the fact, they proved tragically accurate on that November morning. Fact number 12. John Wayne's hairpiece flies off on camera. The final mud fight scene contains the most visible production mistake in the entire film, and once you notice it, you can never unsee it. John Wayne's hairpiece actually comes off as he falls backward after taking a punch, and that moment made it all the way into the final cut that played in theaters. 1960 existed long before digital effects could fix such things in post-production, so once it was shot and edited, that's what audiences got. Either nobody caught it during the editing process, or they caught it and decided reshooting the entire elaborate fight sequence would cost too much money. Given that the production was already running over budget and behind schedule, they probably just shrugged and left it alone. Most people watching in 1960 wouldn't have noticed or cared much if they did, but these days it's become beloved trivia among Wayne fans who know exactly where to look. Fact number 13. Capucine was actually being tickled in that scene. That scene where Capucine tries to laugh convincingly? Years after the film's release, producers came clean about what really happened. They were literally tickling her feet while cameras rolled, which means those laughs and pleas for mercy were completely genuine reactions rather than acting. The admission serves as a reminder of how hands-on and practical film production ran in 1960. Digital manipulation didn't exist to fix a performance that wasn't working. Endless takes and comping together the best moments from each one wasn't an option. When an actress couldn't laugh convincingly enough for the scene to play, you tickled her feet and kept the cameras running until you got what you needed. Whatever works, works. Fact number 14. The mud fight nearly broke Ernie Kovacs. That climactic mud street fight with Nome's roads churned into medieval levels of sodden muck created the most physically demanding work of Ernie Kovacs' entire career. Kovacs had built his reputation as a television comedian, known for innovative TV work, not for rolling around in mud doing stunt fighting with John Wayne. Biographer Diana Rico noted that Kovacs was completely unaccustomed to such brutal physical labor, and the sequence took a real toll on him. His famous joke about the production's chaos captured everything perfectly when he said he'd been there since 9 o'clock that morning and they were behind schedule, so he hadn't even put on his costume yet. He hadn't done anything during the actors' strike, and now he was back at work still not doing anything, which was a great way to make a living. January 13, 1962. Ernie Kovacs died in a car accident just over a year after the film's release. 42 years old, another talented performer gone far too young, another life connected to North to Alaska cut short by a vehicle crash. Fact number 15. The film launched a new phase in John Wayne's career. Turner Classic Movies delivered perhaps the most significant long-term assessment of what North to Alaska accomplished beyond its box office take. Their analysis states the film not only made money but partly shaped the later phase of Wayne's career, helping him reinvent himself as a cowboy with a comic touch, and pointing directly toward True Grit in 1969 and Rooster Cogburn in 1975, with True Grit finally winning Wayne his only Academy Award for Best Actor. The trajectory becomes clear when you step back and look at the through line. North to Alaska proved Wayne could handle comedy effectively, with TCM calling it perhaps the most effective showcase his comic abilities had received up to that point. The slapstick brawl style pioneered here got repeated directly in McLintock. 3 years later in 1963, another audience favorite that leaned into Wayne's comic timing. This comedic sensibility, this willingness to be rowdy and funny and self-deprecating, eventually led straight to Rooster Cogburn, the eye-patch-wearing, whiskey-drinking marshal who finally won Wayne his Oscar at age 62. Without North to Alaska demonstrating Wayne could play broad comedy successfully, would studios have offered him True Grit in the first place? Would he have felt confident enough to play Cogburn as a rumpled, drunken comic figure rather than the stoic heroes he'd been playing for decades? Nobody can say for certain, but the connection runs clear. This hastily assembled comedy western changed the trajectory of American cinema's biggest star. Fact number 16. The stunt team was led by a silent film legend. Richard Talmadge coordinated the film's elaborate brawl sequences, bringing a career that stretched back to the silent era when he'd worked as Douglas Fairbanks' stunt double. Talmadge was already in his 60s by 1960, but still orchestrating complex fight choreography as both stunt coordinator and second unit director, working with a team of at least 15 credited stunt performers. John Wayne relied on 2 primary stunt doubles, Fred Graham and Bob Morgan, but also brought in a separate tree-climbing specialist named Hap Johnson specifically for the pole climbing contest scene. That level of specialization shows how seriously they approached the physical comedy. The fight scenes bookend the entire film, opening with a saloon brawl and closing with the mud street fight, both played in what reviewers described as a rollicking silent picture style with exaggerated cartoon sound effects. Having Richard Talmadge, a man who'd worked with Douglas Fairbanks back in the 1920s, coordinating John Wayne's fights in 1960, creates a direct link across 4 decades of Hollywood action filmmaking. The movie industry has always run on craftspeople passing down their skills through generations, and this film represents that tradition perfectly. Fact number 17. The film was based on an unproduced play from 1939. North to Alaska adapted an unproduced play from 1939 called Birthday Gift by Hungarian playwright Ladislas Fodor, working from an idea by John H. Kafka. The play never made it to Broadway or any other stage, never saw a professional production, just sat in a drawer for over 20 years before Fox decided it would make a serviceable John Wayne vehicle. Studios operated this way throughout the studio era, maintaining vast libraries of unproduced plays, short stories and novels they'd optioned or purchased. When they needed a project quickly, they'd dig through those archives looking for anything that could be adapted fast. Birthday Gift probably caught someone's eye, because its basic premise of a man bringing back a substitute when he couldn't deliver the promised woman had classic farce potential built right in. The original play was likely more sophisticated, but in the hands of Maheen, Rakin, Binion and the uncredited writers, it became a rowdy Western comedy. Ladislas Fodor probably never imagined his work would transform into a John Wayne mudfight spectacular. Fact number 18. Hathaway called the original script garbage. Director Henry Hathaway never minced words about the source material he was working with, telling anyone who'd listen that the original script was full of cliches from every Alaska Gold Rush film ever made, and he should know because he'd worked on 2 different versions of The Spoilers. The Spoilers was Rex Beach's novel about corruption during the Nome Gold Rush, filmed multiple times including a 1942 version that starred John Wayne himself. Hathaway was openly acknowledging that the North to Alaska script essentially recycled the same claim-jumping corrupt officials and frontier justice plots that had been done to death in previous Alaska pictures. His job became salvaging the material by leaning hard into the comedy and the chemistry between Wayne and Granger. What's remarkable is that Hathaway managed to craft something fresh and entertaining from material he considered derivative garbage, especially while shooting without a completed script to work from. That takes directorial skill of the highest order. Fact number 19. It outgrossed massive 1960 releases. The top earners of 1960 paint the picture clearly. Swiss Family Robinson brought in $40.4 million. Psycho earned $32 million. Spartacus pulled $28.7 million. And Exodus grabbed $21.75 million. North to Alaska earned approximately $10 million, landing it solidly in the mid to upper tier of that year's releases rather than scraping the bottom or dominating the top. More importantly for Fox, the film turned a comfortable profit and got called a moneymaker at the British box office, performing exactly as the studio needed it to. When you compare its $10 million gross on a $3.5 to $3.8 million budget against the Alamo's $20 million gross on a $12 million budget, you understand why studios valued North to Alaska more highly. Return on investment matters more than raw grosses, and this film proved a well-cast star vehicle with modest ambitions could outperform an overblown epic every time. Fact number 20. Fabian played Stuart Granger's brother despite a 30-year age gap. Here's a final absurdity that somehow nobody questioned in 1960. Stuart Granger, playing George Pratt, was 30 years older than Fabian, who played his younger brother Billy. Granger was born in 1913, while Fabian came along in 1943, yet they're supposed to be brothers who grew up together in the same family with the same parents. Hollywood aging logic at its finest, where nobody cared that the age gap made zero biological sense. Granger looked good, Fabian brought teen appeal, and that combination was all that mattered to the studio. Modern audiences might raise an eyebrow at brothers separated by 3 decades, but people watching in 1960 were more forgiving of such casting choices, or maybe they just didn't think about it too hard while John Wayne was punching his way through a mud-soaked Nome Street. Every reason existed for North to Alaska to fail spectacularly. Shooting without a script, losing the director and studio head, opening days after the theme song performer died tragically, casting the leading lady through nepotism and throwing in a teen idol purely for box office appeal. By all rights, this should have turned into an expensive disaster. What happened instead was one of John Wayne's most profitable films, earning $10 million worldwide, launching a new comic phase in the Duke's career that eventually led to his only Academy Award for Best Actor, and giving the world one of country music's most beloved songs. For anyone who watched it in theaters in 1960 or discovered it on television in the decades since, North to Alaska represents entertainment that Hollywood simply doesn't make anymore. Rowdy, unpretentious, star-driven vehicles existed purely to give audiences a good time without trying to be art or make political statements. John Wayne and Stuart Granger punching people and chasing a beautiful French actress through Alaskan wilderness that was actually California, and that was enough. The film sits at a fascinating intersection of Hollywood deal-making, personal financial desperation, Alaska statehood excitement, and accidental artistic triumph, reminding us that sometimes the best films emerge from complete chaos. Projects done purely for money can end up meaning more than anyone expected. Johnny Horton's voice still carries across the decades, singing about going north to Alaska, even though he never lived to see how beloved his song would become. Somewhere in the great beyond, John Wayne is probably still grateful that this hastily assembled comedy saved him from bankruptcy and pointed him toward Rooster Cogburn and that long overdue Academy Award for Best Actor. If you enjoyed learning the real story behind North to Alaska, please hit that like button, leave a comment sharing your memories of the film, and subscribe to this channel for more deep dives into classic Hollywood history. These old films have stories that deserve to be remembered, and we'll keep telling them as long as you keep watching. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next video.